The bridge of the Concordat warship Chimera was a temple of quiet efficiency. Polished alloy floors reflected the soft, ambient light from ceiling panels. The air hummed with the perfectly tuned thrum of a contained fusion core. At a glance, it was indistinguishable from any of the other 1,000 Protectorate-class vessels that humanity was entrusted to build, crew, and maintain for the grand fleets of the Galactic Concordat. It was a testament to human engineering. It was reliable, clean, and utterly unremarkable. Captain Marcus Vance stood at the forward viewport. His hands were clasped behind his back, gazing into the swirling nebula of the Seraphina cluster. His reflection stared back at him from the transparent armor plast. He was a man of middle years, his dark hair touched with silver at the temples, his blue uniform crisp and correct. He was the very model of a human captain in the Concordat Navy. Polite, competent, and thoroughly unthreatening. For a century, this had been humanity's role. They were the galaxy's brilliant mechanics, its tireless miners, and its ingenious shipwrights. They fixed the hyperdrives of the haughty Zephyrian stone ships. They calibrated the delicate energy matrices of the intellectual nexary. They managed the logistics for species who couldn't be bothered with such mundane details. They were respected for their work. They were paid well for their labor. And they were never, ever considered equals. That a soft chime drew his attention. "Report, Commander," he said. His voice was even and calm. Commander Eva Rostova, his executive officer, approached from the tactical console. Her expression was a carefully controlled mask of professionalism. But Vance, who had served with her for a decade, could see the faint tightness around her eyes. "The Zephyrian cruiser Stonelords might has acknowledged our repair work, Captain," she reported. Her voice was flat. "They sent a commendation." Vance allowed himself a small, wry smile. Commendation? Or a receipt for services rendered? "A bit of both," Rostova admitted. Their captain expressed his gratitude that a lesser species could grasp the complexities of their kinetic shielding. He said our work was surprisingly adequate. The bridge crew, all human, all trained to ignore such casual insults, went about their duties. But Vance saw a few jaws tighten. He saw the flicker of resentment in the eyes of the young helmsman. It was a sentiment he knew well. It was a low-burning coal of indignation that every human in service carried. They had built this ship. They ran this ship. They understood its every circuit and well better than any Zephyrian could ever hope to. And yet, they were still the help. "Our adequate work," Vance said, turning back to the starfield, "is the only reason their kinetic shields didn't collapse during their last encounter with that asteroid field. See that it's logged, Commander. File it under interspecies diplomacy." "Aye, Captain." Rostova returned to her station. The silence settled back onto the bridge, comfortable and familiar. To any alien officer who might step aboard, this was a ship of quiet servants going about their duties. But to Vance, the silence was alive. It was the silence of secrets. He knew that beneath the polished deck plates, the Chimera was a liar. He knew that the standard-issue fusion core was coupled with a human-designed singularity tap that the Concordat had deemed too unstable for practical use. He knew the communications array could slice through nexary encryption like a plasma torch through butter. He knew the structural supports were laced with monomolecular filaments that could withstand pressures far beyond Concordat specifications. And he knew that the innocuous-looking panel to the left of his command chair did not, as the official schematics claimed, control the ship's sanitation systems. He carried this knowledge like a physical weight. Every day was a performance. It was a careful act of maintaining the facade of humanity as the galaxy's helpful, harmless junior partner. They were the brilliant, placid workhorses of the Concordat, and the galaxy was happy to let them be. For a galaxy at peace had no need for what humanity truly was, what they had been before they'd reached for the stars and learned to be polite. Vance closed his eyes for a moment. He let the low hum of the engines vibrate through the soles of his boots. He could feel the power of the ship, the real power, coiled and waiting just beneath the surface. It was a sleeping giant. He prayed to whatever gods might be listening, that it would never have to wake up. The serene hum of the bridge was shattered by a sudden, jarring alarm. It wasn't the polite chime of an incoming hail. It was the raw, frantic squawk of a priority distress beacon. Before anyone could react, another alarm blared, then a third, overlapping in a cacophony of digital screams. "Report." Vance snapped. His calm demeanor vanished in an instant as he strode toward the tactical console where Commander Rostova was already working. Her hands were a blur across the holographic interface. "Sir, I'm getting multiple, fragmented distress signals," Rostova said, her voice strained. "They're coming from the Epsilon Eridani system. Elysium landing." Her fingers flew, trying to stitch the data packets together. "Another one, from the Tau Ceti system. Kepler's Hope." A cold dread settled over the bridge. Two of humanity's largest civilian colonies were both broadcasting emergency alerts simultaneously. This was no accident. "Put it on the main screen. All of it," Vance commanded. The panoramic view of the nebula vanished. It was replaced by a chaotic mosaic of grainy, terrified images. A woman's face, streaked with blood and grime, filled one quadrant. Behind her, a building that Vance recognized as the Elysium Landing Administrative Center was engulfed in flames. "This is Administrator Shea. We are under attack. Unknown ships. They're bombing the cities. Send help." Her transmission dissolved into static. Another quadrant showed a shaky recording from a ground camera on Kepler's Hope. Massive, reptilian figures, each easily 8 feet tall, clad in jagged black armor and carrying heavy energy rifles, were storming a spaceport. They moved with a brutal efficiency, firing into crowds of fleeing civilians. The screams were cut short by the sizzle and pop of their plasma weapons. "The attackers," Rostova said, her voice barely a whisper as she cross-referenced. "The ship designs against the Concordat database. Hull configurations match the KR-Thar Dominion." The name hung in the air like a death sentence. The KR-Thar were a predatory, expansionist empire. The Concordat had kept them contained for centuries through a combination of posturing and political maneuvering. But they had always been a simmering thread on the edge of civilized space that a final, horrifying message flickered onto the screen. It was from a man, his face a mask of pure terror, hiding behind a fallen transport shuttle. "They're landing troops, taking prisoners. Our defense grid is gone. Please, for the love of God, someone help us." The camera spun wildly as a clawed, 3-fingered hand reached for him. Then the feed went dead. Silence descended on the bridge of the Chimera. It was a heavy, suffocating silence, filled with the ghosts of screams and the afterimage of fire. Every member of the crew stared at the screen. Their faces were pale with shock and a rising, incandescent rage. These weren't abstract reports from a distant conflict. These were their people, their homes, families, children, and friends. Vance looked at the frozen image of the KR-Thar soldier. Its reptilian face was contorted in a predator's snarl. He saw the burning cities and the helpless civilians. In that moment, all the years of quiet frustration, of swallowed insults and feigned subservience, coalesced into a single, diamond-hard point of certainty. The Concordat's political games, their endless debates, their patronizing dismissal of human concerns. This was the result. Their negligence had just cost thousands of human lives. The sleeping giant was no longer just stirring. It was awake. "Patch me through to Concordat High Command." Vance's voice was dangerously quiet. It was a tone his crew recognized as far more alarming than any shout. "Priority channel. Encryption Omega." Commander Rostova's fingers danced across her console. She bypassed standard protocols to establish a direct, secure link. A moment later, the main screen resolved into the image of High Counselor Valerius. The Nexary official was exactly as Vance remembered him from diplomatic briefings. He was an impossibly ancient being whose elegant, elongated features were etched with an expression of serene, intellectual detachment. He floated in his chamber on Centauri Prime, surrounded by shimmering data streams and esoteric artifacts. "Captain Vance," Valerius began, his voice a melodic, synthesized chime. "An Omega-level encryption interrupt is a serious breach of protocol. This had better be of the utmost importance." "It is, Counselor," Vance said, dispensing with pleasantries. He gestured to Rostova. "Play back the distress logs from Elysium Landing and Kepler's Hope." The harrowing images of the KR-Thar attack filled the screen next to Valerius's floating form. The Nexary watched. His silver eyes betrayed no emotion as burning buildings and slaughtered civilians flickered across the display. When the last, horrifying clip ended, he remained silent for a long moment, processing. The KR Dominion, Valerius stated. His tone was as placid as if he were discussing a meteorological report. Unfortunate. Their aggression has long been a point of contention in the outer quadrants. Unfortunate, Vance repeated, his control beginning to fray. Counselor, they are exterminating 2 human colonies with a combined population of over 100,000 souls. We request immediate military intervention. Valerius made a delicate, 3-fingered gesture. Captain, you must understand the complexities. A direct military response against the Dominion is a significant political act. It risks destabilizing the entire sector. The Concordat must consider the broader implications. We must proceed with caution. Vance could hear muted voices in the background of Valerius's transmission. He recognized the gruff, rumbling tone of a Zephyrian. A border skirmish. The humans build their outposts on contested territory. This is the predictable result. Another voice, a sibilant whisper that Vance identified as belonging to the enigmatic whisper caste, echoed through the chamber. The tide pulls back before the tsunami. Change requires sacrifice. Valerius seemed to listen to these unseen advisors before turning his attention back to Vance. The council is convening an emergency session to discuss the matter, he said smoothly. We will draft a formal protest to be sent to the KR High Command. Rest assured, we will apply the full weight of Concordat diplomacy to this situation. Diplomacy. The word hit Vance like a physical blow. They were going to send a strongly worded letter while his people were being hunted in the streets. They were going to debate sanctions and convene subcommittees while children were being loaded onto slave ships. Counselor, Vance said, his voice now dropping to an icy calm. With respect, your diplomatic missives will not stop their plasma cannons. My people are dying now. They do not have time for you to weigh the political implications. Your people are members of the Galactic Concordat, Captain, Valerius corrected him gently. A hint of patronizing steel was in his voice. And they are subject to its processes and protections. You are a military officer. Your role is to follow orders and trust the judgment of your superiors. You will hold your position and await the council's decision. Is that understood? It was in that moment that everything became clear to Marcus Vance. He saw the cold calculation in the Nexary's ancient eyes. He saw the truth he had been pushing down for 20 years. To the Concordat, humanity was a tool, a useful, productive, and ultimately expendable asset. Their lives were entries on a galactic balance sheet, to be weighed against trade agreements and political stability. 100,000 humans were an acceptable loss if it prevented an inconvenient war. The low-burning coal of resentment he had carried for decades roared into a white-hot inferno. The sleeping giant inside him was not just awake. It was standing up. Yes, Counselor, Vance said. His voice was utterly devoid of emotion. Your position is understood perfectly. The holographic image of High Counselor Valerius faded from the screen. This left the bridge of the Chimera once again in its quiet, humming silence. But the character of that silence had changed. It was no longer the quiet of servitude. It was the tense, coiled silence of a predator about to strike. Captain Marcus Vance stood motionless for a 10-second count, his back to the crew. They watched him, waiting. Every man and woman on that bridge had heard the exchange. Every one of them felt the same cold fury, the same profound sense of betrayal. They had sworn an oath to the Concordat, but they had been born human. When Vance finally turned, his face was a mask of carved granite. The polite, respectable officer was gone. In his place stood something older, something the galaxy had forgotten existed. Commander Rostova, he said. His voice rang with an authority that had nothing to do with his Concordat rank. Sever our connection to the Concordat military network. All of it. Erase our operational logs from their servers. Rostova's eyes widened for a fraction of a second. Then her expression hardened in solidarity. Aye, Captain. Wiping the slate clean. Open a ship-wide channel, Vance commanded. His gaze swept across the bridge, meeting the eyes of each crew member. All hands, this is the captain. His voice, broadcast to every corner of the vessel, was steady and absolute. Moments ago, Concordat High Command was made aware of the ongoing genocide at Elysium Landing and Kepler's Hope. They have chosen to respond with debate and diplomacy. They have chosen to sacrifice 100,000 human lives for political convenience. He let the words sink in. The Concordat has demonstrated that our lives are expendable, our families are negotiable, our suffering is acceptable. As of this moment, that arrangement is terminated. A wave of shock, then grim understanding, rippled through the crew. Our oaths to the Concordat are null and void, superseded by a higher duty, our duty to humanity. Vance's voice dropped. It became the auditory equivalent of a sharpened blade. We are no longer a vessel of the Concordat Protectorate. Today, we become what this ship was always meant to be. Humanity's sword. We will do what the Council will not. We will deliver justice. He turned to his helmsman. The man's knuckles were white on the controls. Lieutenant, set a course for the K'Arthar home system. Maximum warp. The helmsman looked up, a fire igniting in his young eyes. Aye, Captain. Course laid in. Engage. The Chimera shuddered. It was not from an impact, but from the sudden, raw power of its true drive systems activating for the first time. The hum of the engines deepened into a predatory growl. Outside the viewport, the stars warped and stretched into lines of impossible color. They were no longer just running from a fight. They were running towards the heart of an empire, a lone ship intent on a war the galaxy wasn't ready for. The giant was awake, and it was hungry. The Chimera ripped through the fabric of space-time. It arrived at the edge of the K'Arthar home system with a silent, violent tearing of reality. One moment there was nothing but the cold void. The next, the human warship was there. It was a sliver of vengeful darkness against the brilliant glow of the K'Arthar sun. Before them lay the heart of the Dominion. A smog-choked, ochre-colored world orbited by a formidable defense fleet. Hundreds of the jagged, insectoid warships moved in precise, interlocking patterns around a vessel of monstrous proportions. That's her, Commander Rostova breathed. Her eyes were fixed on the tactical display. The K'Arthar flagship, World Ender. Imperial-class dreadnought. Over 5 kilometers long. The alien fleet reacted instantly to their arrival. Their formation shifted to face the lone intruder. A priority channel hailed them almost immediately. On the main screen, the reptilian face of Warlord Crothal appeared. He was perched on a command throne made from the bones of some colossal beast. His dark green scales glistened under the harsh lights of his bridge. His yellow, slit-pupiled eyes regarded them with a mixture of curiosity and contempt. A single human vessel. Crothal's voice hissed from the translator. It was a sound like dry scales scraping over rock. You have traveled far to die. Identify yourselves, so I may know the name of the fools whose dust I am about to scatter. Captain. Vance stepped into the center of the bridge. His posture was relaxed. His face was unreadable. I am Captain Marcus Vance of the warship Chimera. You have attacked human colonies. You have murdered human families. That was a mistake. Crothal threw his head back and laughed. It was a horrifying, guttural rattle. A mistake? Your colonies were weak. Your people were pathetic. It is the right of the strong to cull the weak. It is the way of the universe. Your single, insignificant ship is no threat to the might of the Dominion. This isn't a threat, Vance replied. His voice dropped to a near whisper that was somehow more menacing than any shout. This is a reckoning. He cut the transmission. Commander Thorne, bring the lensing field to full power. Reroute main reactor output to the forward lance. Commander Rostova, on my mark, you are authorized to fire at will. Aboard the World Ender, Warlord Crothal gave the order. Destroy them. The K'Arthar fleet unleashed a storm of plasma and kinetic energy. Hundreds of brilliant green bolts and hypervelocity slugs converged on the Chimera's position. It was a wave of destructive power that could have slagged a small moon. The human crew braced for an impact that never came. From his observation post on the K'Arthar flagship, Crothal watched in stunned disbelief. The energy beams, the unstoppable projectiles of his mighty fleet, were bending. They warped around the human ship as if space itself had become a distorted lens. It curved the torrent of death harmlessly away into the void. The Chimera sat, untouched in the eye of the storm. It was a calm, dark specter of defiance. What is this sorcery? Crothal hissed. Report. Before his sensor officers could respond, the human ship returned fired. It wasn't a volley. It was a single, piercing lance of pure, white-hot energy. It was brighter and more focused than anything in the K'Arthar arsenal. The beam, a product of human ingenuity layered on top of reverse-engineered Nexari energy science, crossed the distance in a heartbeat and struck a K'Arthar battlecruiser. The alien ship's shields, designed to withstand the fleet battles of the Concordat, flared for a nanosecond and then vanished. The lance didn't just pierce the hull. It vaporized a clean cylinder through the entire length of the vessel. The ship then split in two and detonated in a silent, blossoming fireball. "Target their lead destroyer squadron," Vance ordered, his voice unwavering. The Chimera's weapon ports opened, unleashing a barrage of missiles. But these weren't standard warheads. These were human-designed Marauder drones. Each was equipped with a miniature gravitic drive and a tactical AI that allowed them to perform impossible, last-second maneuvers. They weaved through the K'Arthar point defense fire. They adjusted their trajectories in mid-flight. They slammed into the engines of 5 separate destroyers, disabling them instantly. Crothal stared, his predatory mind struggling to process what was happening. His fleet, his invincible armada, was being dismantled. The human ship was a phantom. It moved with an unnatural agility that belied its size. Its weapons struck with an impossible precision. It didn't fight like any known species. It fought like a force of nature. "All ships," the warlord roared. "Ramming speed. Surround it. Do not let it escape." The world ender itself began to move. Its colossal engines flared as it lumbered toward the smaller human vessel. It was a charging behemoth intent on crushing the gnat that dared to defy it. "Captain," Rostova reported. Her voice was laced with awe. "The dreadnought is on a collision course." Vance watched the massive form of the world ender fill the view screen. He didn't flinch. He simply gave his next command. "Mr. Thorne, give me everything you have. All power to the main lance. Target their bridge." "One is all we need, Warlord," Vance whispered to himself. "One is all we ever needed." The destruction of the world ender was not an end, but a beginning. The K'Arthar home fleet, decapitated and thrown into chaos, scattered in every direction. But the Chimera did not pursue them. Captain Vance had a new objective. It was one born from the cold, hard logic of total war. An empire was not its fleet. An empire was its ability to make war. And he intended to tear that ability out by the roots. Over the next several weeks, the Chimera became a ghost haunting the K'Arthar dominion. It moved with a terrifying unpredictability. It struck at the heart of their military-industrial complex. One day, it would appear in the skies of a shipyard world. Its lances would slice through half-finished dreadnoughts and orbital construction, rings before vanishing back into the void. The next, it would materialize at a major refueling station, igniting colossal tanks of starship fuel in a chain reaction of starbright explosions. The K'Arthar, once the galaxy's most feared predators, were now the prey. Their commanders grew paranoid. They fortified empty systems while the Chimera struck 100 light-years away. Their communications were a mess of panicked reports and contradictory orders. A single human ship was holding their entire empire hostage. The turning point came. At Korvac Station. It was a heavily fortified supply depot deep within K'Arthar territory. The Chimera disabled its defenses with contemptuous ease. It sent in a team of Marines, not to capture the station, but to secure its central data core in the Chimera's intelligence center. Vance stood with Commander Rostova and Dr. Amy Johnson. Dr. Johnson was a xenobiologist whose expertise extended to alien computer systems. The captured K'Arthar data core was being sliced open by the ship's powerful AI. "What have we got, Doctor?" Vance asked. Doctor Johnson's face was pale. Her expression was grim. "It's worse than we thought, Captain. The attacks on Elysium landing. And Kepler's hope weren't just for conquest or resources." She brought a file up on the main screen. It was labeled Project Chimera in the K'Arthar's harsh, angular script. It was a chilling coincidence. "They were capturing our people," Dr. Johnson continued. Her voice trembled with rage. "Thousands of them. They were running experiments, trying to understand human adaptability, our neural plasticity, what they called our chaotic problem-solving capacity." The screen filled with images from the K'Arthar labs. Human prisoners, civilians, were subjected to horrific procedures. Neuroscans, genetic sequencing, vivisection. They weren't trying to create a weapon. They were trying to steal the essence of what made humans human, to see if they could replicate it for themselves. The final log entry from a KR-Thar Zentech was the most damning. Subject resilience is anomalous. Despite extreme physical and psychological stimuli, cognitive function remains stubbornly independent. They resist assimilation at a fundamental level. Recommend termination of program and full species purge. Their adaptability represents an existential threat to Dominion purity. Vance stared at the images. He saw the faces of the men, women, and children from his colonies. The controlled, cold fury that had sustained him for weeks now solidified into something infinitely harder and more dangerous. It was a cold, quiet certainty. "Where are they holding the survivors?" he asked. His voice was lethally soft. Rostova brought up another set of files. "We've located 12 primary research facilities based on the station's data logs. They're scattered across the Dominion. All of them are heavily defended. Then they're all about to become very poorly defended," Vance stated. He turned to the comms unit. "Chief Thorne, report." The engineer's tired, grease-stained face appeared on a secondary screen. "Captain, the ship is holding, but just barely. I'm having to bypass safety overrides just to keep the lensing field stable. Every time we fire the main lance, I'm pretty sure I can hear the reactor weeping. We can't keep this pace up forever." "I don't need forever, Eris," Vance said. "I just need long enough." He looked back at the star chart, at the 12 marked prison camps. "Plot a course to the nearest facility. This is no longer a war of attrition. This is a rescue mission. And a campaign of extermination." The mood on the Chimera changed. The crew had fought with grim determination to avenge the fallen. Now, they fought with a righteous fire to save the living. The war became personal. They weren't just destroying military targets anymore. They were kicking down the doors of hell itself. The Chimera fell upon the first prison facility. It was a fortified moon orbiting a gas giant. The ship attacked not with surgical strikes, but with overwhelming, brutal force. The orbital defenses were obliterated. The ground installations were slagged from orbit. Only the containment block where the human prisoners were held was left untouched. Vance watched from the bridge as his Marines stormed the facility. The feed from their helmet cams displayed on the main screen. He saw them find the survivors. They were emaciated and traumatized, but alive. He saw his soldiers, hardened veterans of this impossible war, gently lift children into their arms and carry them back to the shuttles. One by one, they hit the camps. Each assault pushed the Chimera's failing systems closer to the brink. Each victory was paid for with blown circuits and cracked conduits. But they didn't stop. They fought on, fueled by coffee, stimulants, and pure, unadulterated rage. They were no longer just a warship's crew. They were humanity's wrath made manifest. They were a single, avenging angel burning its way across an empire of monsters. And the galaxy, which had once dismissed them as simple laborers, was beginning to watch in silent, abject terror in the grand chamber of the Galactic Concordat. A silent, profound terror had replaced the usual atmosphere of ponderous debate. The representatives of the galaxy's most ancient and powerful species watched holographic recordings of the Chimera's campaign. Their varied alien features displayed a universal spectrum of disbelief and horror. They watched the lone human ship annihilate the KR-Thar home fleet. They saw it bend physics, shrugging off weapons that should have vaporized it. They witnessed its campaign of retribution, the systematic dismantling of an empire's ability to wage war, executed with a speed and ruthlessness that defied all known military doctrine. This was not the work of the placid, helpful laborers they knew. This was the work of a monster. "It is an aberration," Stonelord Tecton, the representative of the warrior Zephyrians, rumbled. His voice, like the grinding of tectonic plates, echoed in the vast chamber. His rocky hide seemed to bristle with agitation. A single rogue element. They must be crushed before their chaotic influence spreads. High Counselor Valerius floated serenely at the center of the chamber. His silver eyes took in the panicked reactions of his colleagues. "Crushed, Stonelord? The KR-Thar Dominion, a Tier 2 military power, has been brought to its knees in a matter of weeks by this single rogue element. Their fleets are shattered. Their command structure is in chaos. They are no longer a threat to us, or to anyone. That is not the point. Tecton slammed a massive, granite-like fist on his console. The humans have deployed technologies we deem too dangerous. They have acted unilaterally, outside all Concordat law. They have shown us their true nature. And it is the nature of a predator we have foolishly allowed into our home. The whisper-cast emissary shimmered at the edge of the assembly. A seed of defiance, once planted, grows a forest of rebellion. It whispered into the minds of all present. The other young races are watching. They see a servant breaking its chains. This was the true source of their fear. It wasn't about the K'Arthar, whom none of them had particularly liked anyway. It was about the precedent. For millennia, the Concordat had maintained a delicate balance of power. It was a peace built on carefully managed technological and military hierarchies. Humanity, with their single, impossible warship, had just taken a sledgehammer to that entire structure. We must act decisively, Tecton insisted. We will assemble a fleet. The greatest fleet this galaxy has ever seen. We will hunt this chimera down and erase it from existence. We must show the galaxy that defiance of the Concordat brings only annihilation. Counselor Valerius sighed. It was a soft chime of resignation. He knew the Zephyrian was right, but for the wrong reasons. A diplomatic approach was now impossible. The fear was too great. And what shall we call this grand armada, Stone Lord? A punishment fleet? No, Tecton declared. His voice rang with self-righteous fury. We will call it the Alliance of Justice. We are not conquerors. We are restoring order. We are putting down a dangerous rebellion to ensure galactic peace. Valerius looked around the chamber. He saw fear in the multifaceted eyes of the insectoid Cthis. He saw anxiety in the fluctuating energy fields of the crystalline sovereignty. They weren't voting to save the K'Arthar. They were voting to cage the humans. They had ignored humanity's pain, and in doing so, had unleashed their power. Now, terrified of that power, they were preparing to do what they should have done for the K'Arthar. They were preparing to go to war. But this time, their enemy wasn't a predictable, expansionist empire. It was a species that had just demonstrated a capacity for warfare that bordered on apocalyptic. And they had been pushed into a corner from which they could never retreat. The chimera was bleeding. Not plasma or atmosphere, but something more fundamental. It was bleeding power. It drifted in the silent darkness of deep space. It had just jumped from its 12th and final raid on a K'Arthar prison camp. The last of the human survivors were safe. They were being tended to in the ship's crowded medical bay. But the vessel that had saved them was dying. Captain Vance stood in the heart of engineering. The air was thick with the smell of ozone and superheated metal. Emergency lights cast long, dancing shadows. They illuminated the fatigue etched onto every face. Chief Engineer Eris Thorne stood before a diagnostic schematic. His hands and uniform were stained black with coolant fluid and grime. The holographic display of the ship's core systems flickered erratically. Entire sections glowed a malevolent, angry red. "Give me the truth, Eris," Vance said, his voice low. Thorne ran a trembling hand through his matted hair. "The truth, Captain? The truth is we're running on miracles and sheer spite. The singularity tap is unstable. I've had to lock down 3 of the 4 magnetic containment rings. The gravitic lensing emitters are showing microfractures. One more high energy impact, and the whole field could collapse." He pointed a grimy finger at the power conduits on the schematic. "These were never meant to handle this kind of load. They're literally melting from the inside out. She's given us all she has, Marcus. One more real fight, and she'll tear herself apart." Vance nodded slowly. The weight of his engineer's words settled upon him. He had known the cost of this war. The Chimera was a prototype, a proof of concept. It had never been intended for a sustained, high-intensity campaign. He had pushed it, and its crew, to the absolute breaking point and beyond, if on cue. Commander Rostova's voice came over his comm unit. It was sharp and urgent. "Captain, you're needed on the bridge. We've just received a coded message through a back channel. It's from Admiral Butler, Vance's contact at Concordat High Command." He had thought the Admiral would have been arrested for his initial defiance. He sprinted to the bridge, arriving as Rostova decrypted the final data packet. The message was short and grim. A single star chart appeared on the main screen. It showed the Epsilon Eridani system, the location of the ruined Elysium landing colony. and surrounding the coordinates of the colony's memorial beacon were over 500 Concordat military signatures. "The Alliance of Justice," Rostova said. Her voice was laced with venom. "They're waiting for us. They know we'll go back. To pay our respects. They're using our dead to set a trap." Vance stared at the tactical display. 500 of the Concordat's finest warships, assembled not to fight a rampaging empire, but to annihilate a single, battered human vessel that had dared to do their job for them. It was a cowardly act, but a strategically sound one. There was no escape, no trick, no brilliant maneuver could save them from a force that large, not in their ship's condition that he could run. He could take the Chimera into the uncharted territories of the void. He could try to find a place to hide, to repair, to survive. But he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his core, what would happen then. The Concordat would declare, humanity a rogue, terrorist species. They would blockade Earth. They would hunt down their colonies. His defiance would have doomed his people to a slow, strangled extinction. He looked at the icon for the Elysium Memorial. It was a tiny spark representing the 50,000 lives lost, a sacrifice demanded by galactic indifference. He could not let that sacrifice be in vain. The Chimera could not win, but it could still send a message. A final, bloody, unforgettable message that would be etched into the memory of every species in the galaxy. That he straightened his uniform jacket. The simple gesture felt momentous, final. "Commander Thorne," he said into his comms, "I need one more miracle. Give me everything the ship has left. I don't care if it melts the engines. I need 1 hour of full combat capability." Thorne's voice came back, strained but resolute. "You'll have it, Captain." Vance turned to his crew on the bridge. He saw their exhaustion. He saw their fear. But underneath it, he saw the same diamond-hard resolve that burned in his own heart. "They're waiting for us at Elysium," he said. His voice was quiet, but carrying to every corner of the bridge. "They think they've trapped us." He looked at the tactical display of the 500 enemy ships. "Then let's not disappoint them." A grim smile touched his lips. "Let's make sure it's a fight they remember for 10,000 years." The ruins of Elysium Landing were a graveyard of stars. The Chimera emerged from hyperspace into a sphere of waiting predators. 512 warships of the Alliance of Justice hung in the void. It was a wall of metal and energy enclosing the memorial beacon that pulsed like a lonely heart in the wreckage. On the bridge of the human ship, the tactical display bloomed with threat indicators. It was a forest of hostile red icons so dense it blotted out the star chart beneath. Aboard the Alliance flagship, the Nexus of Reason, High Counselor Valerius watched the lone human ship appear. It was scarred, pitted, and bleeding faint trails of ionized gas from a dozen different hull breaches. It looked less like a warship and more like a wounded animal that had crawled home to die. Yet it had come. The sheer, irrational defiance of it sent a tremor of unease through his ancient, logical mind. "Hail them," Valerius commanded. Captain Vance's face appeared on the Nexus's main screen. He looked tired, worn, but his eyes burned with an unholy light. "Captain Vance," Valerius began, his synthesized voice calm and reasonable. "You are surrounded. Your vessel is critically damaged. This is over. Surrender now, and I will personally guarantee your crew's safety. There is no honor in a meaningless death." Vance's laugh was a harsh, bitter sound that crackled over the comms. "Honor? You speak to me of honor? You, who hid behind procedure while the KR there burned our worlds. You, who set a trap for us using the graves of our dead as bait." He leaned closer to his camera, his eyes locking onto Valerius's. "There is no meaning in surrender, counselor. But in death? In death, there is a message. And it's one you will hear for the rest of your long, civilized lives." He cut the connection. "Captain," Rostova said, her hands flying over the tactical board. "They're moving into firing position." "Eris," Vance said into his comms, "give me the miracle." "She's all yours, Captain." The engineer's voice came back, strained and breathless. "The core is redlined. Every system is pushed to its breaking point. Have a hell of a ride." The Chimera surged forward. Not away from the fleet, but directly into its densest concentration. It was the move of a madman. It was a charge so suicidally reckless that the lead Alliance ships hesitated for a fatal second. The battle that followed was not a battle. It was a supernova of violence. It was a final, glorious symphony of destruction. The Chimera, its systems, screaming under the strain of an overload that was actively tearing it apart, became a dervish of impossible fury. The main lance, glowing with the raw, unfiltered energy of the dying reactor, fired not once or twice, but in a continuous, searing beam. Vance didn't wait for targeting locks. He had his helmsman, Lieutenant Parker, use the ship itself as a paintbrush. She swept the beam across the enemy fleet in a wide, destructive arc. The shields of Zephyrian cruisers flared and died. The crystalline hulls of their support ships shattered into a million glittering shards. Gravitic field is fluctuating. Thorn yelled over the comms. I can't hold it stable. The ship rocked as a volley of plasma bolts slammed into its port side, bypassing the failing field. Consoles exploded. Rostova was thrown from her station, her arm bleeding from a piece of shrapnel. Commander, Vance shouted. I'm fine, she yelled back, scrambling back to her post, one-handed. Enemy dreadnoughts on the port and starboard flanks are attempting to pin us in a crossfire. Lieutenant Parker, Vance said, his voice a low growl. Show them how we dance. The young pilot gave a wild, desperate grin. She threw the Chimera into a maneuver that defied physics. It was a spiraling barrel roll that sent the overloaded gravitic field pulsing outwards in a shockwave. The two flanking dreadnoughts, caught off guard by the spatial distortion, saw their own torpedoes veer off course and slam into their allies. Aboard the Nexus, Valerius watched in abject horror. This wasn't warfare. This was chaos given form. The human ship wasn't fighting to win. It was fighting to inflict as much pain and confusion as possible before the end. It ignored its own damage. It traded hull integrity for better firing angles. It sacrificed entire sections of the ship just to take one more enemy with it. Hull breach on decks 4 through 9. Rostova shouted over the wail of alarms. Life support failing. We've lost main weapons. Divert auxiliary power to the Marauder drones, Vance commanded. Fire them all. No targets. Just launch. The last of the Chimera's munitions shot out into the swirling chaos of the battle. The drones, their targeting safeties removed, began to seek out and attach themselves to the nearest ships. They chewed through their hulls with their small plasma cutters. Reactor breach is imminent, Captain. Thorn's voice was a ragged scream. 30 seconds to meltdown. All hands, this is the captain, Vance broadcast across the dying ship. His voice rang with a strange, calm pride. It has been the greatest honor of my life to serve with you. Hold fast. He turned to his communications officer. Broadcast this on all channels. Unencrypted. To the entire galaxy. His face filled the screens of every ship in the Alliance fleet, of every station in the Concordat, of every colony in human space. He looked directly at them. His eyes were filled not with fear, but with an unbreakable, terrifying resolve. Remember, this day, Captain Marcus Vance said, remember the price of human lives. When you think to threaten our homes, when you think to harm our children, when you believe your politics are more important than our people, remember the Chimera. We will always answer. On the bridge of the Nexus, High Counselor Valerius saw it then. The human ship, venting plasma from a dozen wounds, its forward section glowing cherry red from the impending reactor breach, was not retreating. It was accelerating, directly towards his flagship. Evasive maneuvers. Valerius shrieked, his millennia of calm shattered. But it was too late. The USS Chimera did not simply explode. It detonated in a silent, blinding flash of white that consumed everything around it. The overloaded singularity tap collapsed, tearing a momentary hole in reality itself. The gravitic shockwave, unleashed from its failing containment, slammed into the heart of the Alliance fleet. The Nexus of Reason, its shields buckling, was thrown tumbling through space. Dozens of smaller ships were simply vaporized. When the light faded, there was nothing left. No wreckage, no debris, not even dust. The Chimera was gone, and in its place, there was only a profound and terrible silence. The Alliance of Justice had won. But as Valerius stared at the gaping hole in his fleet and the ghost of an afterimage burned into his optical sensors, he knew, with a certainty that would haunt him for the rest of his existence, that they had lost something far more important. They had not defeated an enemy. They had created a legend. 6 months later, the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Concordat was a place transformed. The arrogant certainty was gone, replaced by a somber, chastened silence. The Alliance of Justice had limped back from the ruins of Elysium landing with less than a third of its fleet intact. They brought with them a story of such impossible defiance that it had sent shockwaves through every government from the core worlds to the outer rim. Captain Vance's final message had been heard, and it could not be unheard. Today, a new human delegation stood at the central podium. They were not military officers, but diplomats in simple, dark blue attire. At their head stood an older woman with sharp, intelligent eyes, Ambassador Anya Sharma. High Counselor Valerius floated before her. His serene detachment was now replaced by a profound weariness. He looked at the human ambassador, and for the first time, he saw not a servant or a potential threat, but an equal. Ambassador Sharma, Valerius began. His voice was broadcast throughout the silent chamber. On behalf of the Galactic Concordat and its member species, I offer a formal, unconditional apology to the people of humanity. He made a gesture of deep respect, one not seen in the Council for millennia. Your colonies were attacked. We failed to act. We failed our duty as protectors of peace. When you acted to defend your own, we responded not with support, but with fear and aggression. We were wrong. The loss of the Chimera and its crew is a stain upon the honor of this council, one that we shall carry forever. A new treaty was projected onto the holographic displays around the chamber. It was called the Treaty of Elysium. It granted humanity full, autonomous status, control over their own defense forces, and a permanent, veto-wielding seat on the High Council. It was more than any species had been offered in 10,000 years. Later, in a private chamber, Valerius met with Ambassador Sharma. The formal apologies had been made. This was a moment of stark honesty. We did not understand, the ancient Nexari admitted. His silver eyes were clouded with something akin to regret. We saw your adaptability, your rapid technological growth, and we were afraid. We saw it as a potential for chaos, for conquest. We never considered it might be a potential for heroism. You were not entirely wrong to be afraid, Counselor. Sharma replied, her voice even. Humanity is dangerous. Our history is filled with violence, much of it directed at ourselves. But that same history taught us the value of sacrifice. Captain Vance and his crew understood that. They sacrificed themselves to send a message, Valerius said. The memory of the Chimera's final, suicidal charge was clearly still vivid in his mind. No, the ambassador corrected him gently. They sacrificed themselves to buy our security. The Chimera proved that humanity would never again be a victim. Its destruction proved that we do not seek to be conquerors. Captain Vance destroyed an empire that preyed on the weak. But in his final act, he spared the galaxy from a war with a species that had just demonstrated it could not be beaten by conventional means. He bought you peace, Counselor. A peace paid for with human blood. Valerius was silent for a long moment. He was processing the terrible truth of her words. We will honor that sacrifice, he said finally. You will, Ambassador Sharma agreed. And so will we. We will honor it by ensuring such a tragedy never, ever happens again. Across the galaxy, the legend of the Chimera grew. It was a ghost story told on the bridges of warships. It was a cautionary tale whispered in the halls of power. It was a story of how the galaxy's quiet, unassuming mechanics had a monster hidden in their garage, and how they had unleashed it not for conquest, but for justice. They had entered the war, and in their final, defiant act, they had ensured that nothing, not an empire, not an alliance, not the indifference of an entire galaxy, would ever survive threatening their path to the stars again.